Hello, and welcome. I'm Aiden, your narrator for tonight. Let's take this time together to step away from the rush of the day and ease into a world of dreams and wonder. Tonight, I'll tell you a story about a hidden library that only appears beneath the full moon's glow. Within its quiet halls, a silent custodian guards shelves of books that were never meant to be read until a curious child discovers its mysterious door. But before we begin, we'd love to hear from you. Where are you listening from? And what time is it as you settle in to hear this story? We'd also love to know what kinds of stories you'd enjoy next. Your thoughts and suggestions inspire us, so please share them in the comments below. If you'd like even more from us, you can check out our Patreon, where you'll gain early access to all our stories, as well as a curated Spotify playlist to help you rest. And if these bedtime stories have been a gentle pause in your nights, subscribing is the simplest way to support us. It means the world to us, and it helps us keep this space soft and sacred for dreamers like you. Now, close your eyes if you wish. Let your breathing fall into a calm and steady rhythm, and allow the weight of the day to drift gently away. Picture the silver glow of the moon washing over a quiet town, the world hushed in its embrace. Somewhere in that stillness, a door appears, waiting to be opened. And so, our story begins. The town lay cradled in a valley, as though the hills themselves had drawn together to keep it safe. By day, it was an ordinary place, where shopkeepers greeted each other with nods, children played along the cobbled lanes, and the smell of freshly baked bread drifted from the little bakery on the corner. Life there moved slowly, quietly, as if even the clocks knew better than to hurry. But when the sun set and the moon began its climb into the sky, the town changed. Shadows deepened into gentle pools, the air cooled, and silence took on a life of its own. On these nights, the townsfolk often spoke in softer tones, or not at all, as if they feared to disturb the silver light bathing the streets. The older ones, those who remembered tales whispered from their own grandparents, knew the truth of what the moonlight carried. They spoke of a place hidden from the world, a library that appeared only when the moon was round and whole, shining brighter than any lantern. The younger ones scoffed at such things, dismissing them as bedtime stories meant to hush restless children. But the old kept their knowing smiles and said little more. For in this town, there was indeed something that stirred with the turning of the moon. At the very edge, where the last row of houses leaned against the field, and the field itself melted into a stretch of quiet meadow, there appeared, from time to time, a door. It did not belong to any house, nor did it lead into any barn or cellar. It simply stood there, tall and unyielding, carved of oak so dark it seemed to drink in the moonlight. To most eyes, the meadow looked perfectly empty, but those with patience, and perhaps a little wonder left in them, might glimpse the faint outline of the door under the silver glow. The people of the town called this place, though only in whispers, the Moonlight Archives. They said it was not a library in the way one thought of libraries, with simple shelves and catalogued tomes. No, this was a place where the shelves reached further than sight, where the books hummed with secrets, and where the very air was alive with words waiting to be spoken. Some believed the library held every story ever told, from the grand epics sung in courts to the soft lullabies hummed by mothers to their babes. Others said it contained not the past, but the unwritten, tales still waiting for their chance to breathe. Whatever the truth, one fact never changed. It was guarded. The Custodian was his name, though none in the town could tell you who he was, nor what he looked like. Some said he was a man older than time, draped always in a dark cloak, who moved like smoke through the endless halls. Others insisted he was not a man at all, but something born of the moon's own light, a being woven from silence and shadows. He did not speak, they claimed, for his duty was too grave to be disturbed by words. His task was to guard the books, to make certain none fell into unready hands. For within those pages lay truths and futures not meant to be glimpsed, except by those chosen. On full moon nights, when the light stretched long and silver over the rooftops, children would dare each other to run to the meadow's edge, to see if the door was truly there. They often returned breathless and laughing, claiming to have seen only grass and mist. Yet sometimes, just sometimes, one would return wide-eyed and quiet, unable to explain what had brushed their vision. And so, the tale lived on, carried from one generation to the next. This was the way of things, until one night, when the moon rose round and heavy in the sky, brighter than it had in many years. The town settled into its usual stillness, but in one small house at the edge of the square, a child sat by her window, her chin resting in her hands. She was restless, her heart full of the kind of hunger that stories only partly satisfied. She had read every book in the schoolroom, borrowed every tale from the kindly old man who ran the general store, and even begged travelers for the fables of their homelands. Yet still, she longed for something more, something that felt like it belonged to her alone. Her eyes lifted to the moon, and she thought she saw it shimmer, just faintly, like a silver ripple across water. Something stirred within her, a pull, gentle but insistent, as though the night itself was calling her forward. She did not know why, nor where it might lead, but she felt it all the same. Outside, the meadow lay waiting, and if one looked closely, past the drifting mist and the silver shadows of the grass, one might have seen the faint outline of a door, dark and tall, waiting for the one who would dare to open it. When the moonlight spread its silver glow across the meadow, the door of oak stirred, and beyond it, the library awakened. Candles flickered to life along its endless corridors, their flames swaying as though they breathed with the night. Dust that had settled quietly over the shelves lifted in faint spirals, sparkling like motes of starlight in the dim glow. It was not an ordinary opening of doors, nor the routine hum of a mortal place. This was the Moonlight Archives drawing breath, and at its heart stood the Custodian. He moved in silence, as he always had, his steps soundless upon the stone floor. Cloaked in a garment darker than midnight, he carried a lantern whose light was softer than flame, a golden radiance that seemed to flow like honey through the air. His face, though rarely seen, was calm, and his eyes, when they caught the light, shimmered with reflections of the moon itself. His presence carried no words, yet his silence was never empty. It was a silence filled with knowing, with patience that stretched further than years, with the weight of stories that should never be spoken aloud. The Custodian's nightly task was simple, though no less solemn: to tend to the books that lined the shelves. These volumes were no ordinary tomes bound in leather and ink. They were woven from moonlight, from threads of memory and fragments of what might be. Some whispered softly to themselves, murmuring lines of futures not yet written. Others pulsed faintly with a glow, holding secrets too sharp for gentle hearts. A few, rare and dangerous, rattled faintly against their bindings, as though eager to be read, eager to be loosed upon the world. These were the books he guarded most closely, binding them with seals that shimmered silver under his lantern's glow. His hands, though steady, bore a kind of care that revealed his burden. He dusted each spine, straightened each stack, and pressed a calming palm to the bindings that trembled. The library was alive, restless under the moon, and only his quiet watch kept it from unraveling. There were nights when the books grew more insistent, when whispers rose into restless murmurs, filling the air with 1,000 overlapping voices. Yet the Custodian never faltered. With a lantern sweep, with a soft hand upon the shelves, he hushed them back into slumber. Outside, the world remained unaware. The townsfolk slept in their beds, their dreams safe and untouched, never realizing that just beyond the meadow, whole worlds stirred, contained and guarded. For it was not only stories of people and places that the books held, but stories of time itself, paths that could unfold differently if given to eager hands. To read them was to risk stepping beyond what should be known, and that was why the Custodian endured his solitude. His silence was his oath his lantern his shield, and the library his charge. Though no one in the town had ever seen him, legends about the Custodian persisted. Some claimed he was as old as the hills themselves, never aging, never weary. Others imagined him as a sorrowful guardian, once human, who had chosen duty over freedom. In truth, he was both more and less than these tales. He had no need for recognition, no longing for company, no desire to leave his post. His life was the library, and the library was his life. And yet, in the quietest hours, when the moon dipped low and the shelves were at peace, a faint ache sometimes stirred in him. It was not loneliness, exactly, but something deeper, an echo of a choice long past, a memory he carried, though it no longer belonged to him. In those rare moments, he would pause, lifting his lantern to gaze across the endless aisles of unwritten futures, and wonder who might one day come to see what was never meant to be seen. Then, as always, the lantern's glow steadied. His hand brushed the shelves once more, and the Custodian returned to his silence. The night stretched on, and the Moonlight Archives dreamed with him, waiting for the moment when fate would stir its stillness. In the quiet town where the days passed gently, there lived a child who carried within her a boundless hunger for stories. Her name was Alara, and though she was no more than 10 years of age, she had already read every book she could lay her hands on. Her father, who kept the ledgers for the mill, often returned home with worn copies of fables and histories borrowed from neighbors. Her mother, who loved to sew by the firelight, whispered old tales from her own childhood, stories filled with songs of rivers and mountains that spoke. Yet even with all of these, Alara longed for more. Unlike other children who found joy in games at the market square or chasing each other along the stream, Alara found her joy in words. She often slipped away to the general store, where the kindly shopkeeper, Mr. Oswin, kept a modest shelf of books by the counter. He would shake his head with a smile when she arrived, knowing she would devour whatever she borrowed in just a night or two. She read with a lamp beneath her blanket, long after the household had gone to sleep, her eyes shining with wonder at distant lands and forgotten heroes. For Alara, stories were not just entertainment. They were windows. They showed her a world larger than the narrow streets of her town, a world filled with mysteries and marvels waiting to be discovered. Yet, as weeks turned into months, Alara began to feel a quiet restlessness. No matter how lovely the stories were, no matter how rich with adventure, they always belonged to someone else. Each tale ended neatly, with its lessons clear and its voices fading when the last page closed. But Alara wondered, what if there were stories still unfolding? Stories that had no endings, stories that lived and breathed. What if there were tales waiting for someone like her to discover them? Often, when the moon was high, she sat by her window, her cheek pressed against the cool pane of glass. From there, she could see the rooftops and the stretch of meadow at the edge of town, its grass swaying silver under the night sky. Something about the meadow always drew her gaze. It looked ordinary enough in daylight, a place where children sometimes ran, or where wild flowers blossomed in spring. But in the moonlight, it carried an air of expectancy, as though it held its breath, waiting for something unseen. Elara felt it keenly, though she could never explain why. Her parents worried, in their gentle way, about her wandering thoughts. Her father urged her to sleep more, warning that stories could not fill a belly or light a hearth. Her mother reminded her that dreams were lovely, but one could not live in them forever. Elara nodded politely, but inside, she knew she was different. Stories were not an escape for her. They were a calling. Something within her whispered that the world was far larger than anyone else seemed willing to believe. One evening, as the town settled into the hush of night, Elara clutched a small book of myths to her chest. It was her favorite, its cover frayed and corners bent from countless readings. She whispered aloud the last line of her favorite tale. And when the moon is full, the hidden door will open to those who dare to seek it. The words lingered in her room like a promise. Outside, the moon had risen bright and heavy, its light spilling like liquid silver across the rooftops and fields. Elara's heart beat faster as she leaned against the window. For the briefest of moments, she thought she saw something impossible at the meadow's edge. A tall shadow where there should have been only grass. It flickered, faint but undeniable, like the shimmer of a half-remembered dream. She pressed her hand to the glass, her breath fogging the pain. Though she could not yet explain what she had seen, a certainty filled her heart. The stories she loved so dearly were not finished. Somewhere beyond the meadow, beyond the silver light, there waited a tale that belonged to her alone. The night was so still that even the rustling of the trees seemed to have hushed in reverence to the full moon. Its pale light poured across the rooftops of the town, spilling down into the fields where the grass swayed gently like a sea of silver threads. Elara had slipped from her bed without a sound, her book still resting on the quilt, and padded softly across the creaking floorboards. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, pushed open the window latch, and crept down the narrow path behind her home. Her bare feet kissed the cool earth, and with each step, her heart pounded louder, echoing like a drum she couldn't silence. The meadow at night was different from how it appeared during the day. The flowers were closed, the stalks bowed low, and a veil of mist hung lightly above the grass, as if the world itself wanted to hide what she was about to see. Elara paused at the edge, her breath caught in her throat. For a moment, She almost turned back, reminding herself of her mother's voice warning against strange wanderings. But then the shimmer appeared again, faint, like the glint of water in the moonlight. She stepped forward. The mist parted, and before her stood the thing she had thought she imagined the night before. A door. It rose taller than any man, carved of oak so dark it drank in the moonlight. Its frame was plain, without hinges or handles, yet it seemed alive, as though it had grown from the very air. Patterns traced faintly across its surface, swirls and arcs that resembled both vines and constellations, glowing softly when the moonlight struck them. Elara's small fingers trembled as she reached out, drawn by a pull she could not resist. The air around the door thrummed faintly, like the hum of a distant bell. Each step closer made her skin prickle, her senses sharpen. She knew instinctively that no one else in town could see it, that it appeared only to those who dared to look. She whispered, almost to herself, "It's real." The words escaped her lips, as if carried on the night's own breath. For several heartbeats, she stood still, her hand hovering inches away. She wondered what would happen if she touched it. Would it vanish into mist? Would it lock her away forever in some strange place? Her stomach knotted with fear, and yet, more strongly, with wonder. She had always believed stories hid truths, and now one of those truths was before her. Her fingertips brushed the surface. The oak felt cool, smoother than she expected, like polished stone rather than wood. A ripple of light moved beneath her touch, spiraling outward across the carved patterns. The hum deepened, and the air thickened with the weight of something waking. Elara gasped softly, but did not pull away. Then, without a sound, the door gave way. It swung inward on invisible hinges, revealing not the meadow beyond, but a soft glow, golden and deep, like sunlight held captive in a dream. Elara's heart fluttered as she stepped forward, the mist curling around her ankles, the air warm and strange on her face. For a moment, she hesitated at the threshold, glancing back at the town. The rooftops were distant now, hushed and ordinary, as if they belonged to another world entirely. Ahead stretched something vast and waiting, a silence so full it seemed to hold its breath. Gathering her courage, Elara crossed the threshold. The meadow vanished. The night air was replaced by the faint scent of parchment and candle wax. Her feet now rested on smooth stone, and before her, rising higher than she could see, were shelves upon shelves of books, glowing faintly in the lantern light. She exhaled in awe, her voice a whisper lost in the vastness. "The Moonlight Archives," she breathed, though no one had ever told her its name aloud. The door closed softly behind her, and the world she had always known was gone. The air inside the library was thick with stillness, yet not the suffocating kind. It was a silence that felt sacred, like stepping into a cathedral where every sound must be held carefully, so as not to disturb the holy air. Elara stood frozen, her eyes wide as she took in the impossible sight before her. The shelves stretched higher than her gaze could follow, vanishing into shadows far above, and they ran so deep in every direction that the end could not be seen. The lanterns that hung along the aisles glowed not with flame, but with a soft golden shimmer, as though the light had been spun from the moon itself. The books, countless in number, glimmered faintly, their spines alive with quiet patterns. Some appeared as ordinary as the novels in Mr. Oswin's shop, their bindings worn and leathered. Others seemed carved from crystal, their edges catching the glow of the lanterns like prisms. A few pulsed gently, as though they carried a heartbeat within. As she stepped forward, her small shoes clicking softly on the stone floor, she swore she could hear them whisper. It was not a sound her ears caught, but something deeper, words brushing against her thoughts, the way dreams sometimes spoke without voices. Elara's breath quickened. Every part of her wanted to run through the aisles, to reach out and pull book after book from the shelves. Her hands twitched with longing, yet something in the air restrained her. It wasn't unkind, but it was firm, like a guiding hand reminding her to tread carefully. She turned her head and nearly cried out. Not far down the aisle stood a figure. Tall, cloaked in black, he held a lantern whose glow curved gently against the shadows. His face was hidden by the cowl of his hood, but his presence was unmistakable. This was no ordinary librarian, no kindly bookkeeper. This was the Custodian. He did not move toward her, nor did he retreat. He only stood, as though he had been waiting all along. The lantern in his hand flickered, but its light was steady, casting an amber halo across the shelves. Elara felt her chest tighten. For all the stories she had devoured about guardians and watchers, nothing prepared her for the weight of being seen by him. His silence was heavier than any voice, filled with something she could not name. She swallowed, unable to find words. The Custodian turned, slowly, and began to walk. His steps made no sound, but the lantern's glow guided her eyes. He moved deeper into the shelves, and though she hesitated, Elara followed. It was not fear that pulled her forward, but an irresistible sense that this was what she was meant to do. As they walked, the aisles shifted. She was certain of it. Where moments before the shelves had been lined with crystal volumes, now they held scrolls bound in ribbons of gold. The ground beneath her seemed to hum faintly, alive with the weight of countless stories. A breeze stirred, though there were no windows, carrying with it the faintest scents. Fresh rain, smoke from distant fires, blossoms she did not recognize. It was as if the library itself contained the very breath of every tale ever imagined. The custodian stopped at a wide alcove where a single lectern stood. Upon it rested a book larger than any Elara had ever seen. Its cover gleamed faintly silver, as if woven from threads of moonlight. She drew closer, her heart racing. The custodian lifted his lantern higher, illuminating the title. There were no words etched into it, only a faint shimmer that shifted when she moved, forming shapes she could almost recognize, but never fully read. She reached out instinctively, but the custodian lowered his lantern and gently placed a hand upon the book's cover, barring her from touching it. His silence carried the weight of warning, yet his gaze, though unseen, did not feel cruel. It was patient, as though he knew she must first learn why she was here before she could truly touch anything at all. Elara lowered her hand, her curiosity burning brighter than ever. Around her, the shelves seemed to lean closer, listening. And in that moment, though she did not yet understand, she felt the truth settle in her chest. She had not stumbled into the Moonlight Archives by accident. The library had opened its door for her. Elara's eyes wandered from shelf to shelf, trying to drink in every glimmer, every shimmer, every restless whisper that curled from the bindings of the books. The custodian's lantern glowed warmly, its circle of light following his measured steps. She felt safe within its glow, though her curiosity burned brighter than any lantern. As she moved along the aisle, her gaze caught on something peculiar. Among the infinite spines, some etched with stars, some glowing faintly like embers, there was one book that seemed to pulse with recognition. Its cover was simple compared to the others, bound in soft leather, its glow less dazzling than those that shimmered like jewels. And yet, her breath caught in her throat, for upon its spine, written in letters of liquid silver, was a name. Her name. Elara. She froze. The custodian paused too, as if he had already known she would find it. The lantern's light shifted across the shelf, making her name gleam brighter. The pull was irresistible. With trembling fingers, Elara reached out and slid the book free. It was lighter than she expected, as though it had been waiting for her touch. Her hands quivered as she opened it. The first page glowed faintly, the letters unfurling across the parchment like fireflies spilling light into the air. She read her own story. It began with her birth, the details of her small house, the lullabies her mother sang. Every memory she held within her heart was written there, line by line, as if the book had stolen her very life and poured it into words. Elara's eyes widened as she flipped forward. She saw her trips to the general store, her long nights with a lamp beneath the blanket, the way she sat by her window, and whispered her favorite stories to the moon. She turned the pages quickly, her heart racing faster until she came to the end. And there, her breath caught. The writing stopped. The last words shimmered half-formed, fading away into a blank whiteness. The story of her life had not yet been finished. The custodian stepped forward suddenly, his hand pressing firmly on the open book, stilling its restless glow. His silence spoke louder than any shout, a warning heavy and clear. But Alara, her heart trembling with awe and fear, whispered, "Why? Why does it end? What happens to me?" The custodian's head tilted slightly, the hood shadowing his face. He did not answer with words. Instead, the lantern in his hand flickered, casting the aisle in soft waves of light. For the first time since she entered, Alara sensed conflict in him, as though allowing her to see this much already bent the rules of his duty. But she could not stop. Her fingers pressed against the glowing parchment. "Please," she whispered, voice shaking. "I have to know." She thought of every story she had read, each one wrapping neatly to its end. She thought of how hers stopped midway, as though her life was nothing more than an unfinished tale left on the shelf. The weight of the unknown pressed heavy on her chest. The lantern dimmed, then brightened again. Slowly, reluctantly, the custodian lifted his hand from the book. Alara turned another page, hoping for answers. Instead of words, faint images shimmered across the blank parchment. Visions like smoke, half-formed and shifting. She saw herself older, taller, standing in this very library with the lantern in her own hand. She saw herself walking down strange paths, through towns she had never visited, her face set with both wonder and sorrow. She gasped, her heart pounding, and slammed the book shut before the visions could deepen. The sound echoed down the endless shelves like a thunderclap, and every book on the aisle shivered as though they had awoken. Alara clutched the volume to her chest. The custodian stood utterly still, the golden light of his lantern steady once more. His silence pressed upon her, but beneath it, she felt something else, something deeper than warning. It was sorrow. She lowered her gaze, her voice small in the vastness of the archives. This book is mine, isn't it?" The custodian's lantern flared once, then softened again, as though it had sighed. And though he did not speak, she already knew the answer. The silence that followed her question lingered heavily, as though the shelves themselves were holding their breath. Alara clutched the book tighter, her fingertips pressing into its leather binding, as if letting go would mean losing part of herself. The custodian stood before her, lantern steady in his hand, his hood shadowing his face, yet his presence filled the aisle like an unseen weight. At last, for the first time since she had entered the Moonlight Archives, He spoke. His voice was quiet, low and steady, a sound that carried both gentleness and gravity. "Yes," he said. The words seemed to ripple through the library, stirring the whispers of 1,000 unseen books. "It is yours." Alara's chest tightened. She stared down at the shimmering letters of her name upon the spine, the unfinished story within, the faint visions she had glimpsed. "But why?" she whispered. "Why would my life, my story, be written here?" The custodian lifted the lantern higher, and its golden glow spread wider across the shelves. For a moment, the air itself seemed to shift, and Alara felt as though she stood not in a library of stone and wood, but within a vast sky of stars. The shelves rose endlessly like constellations, each book a spark of light in the darkness. "These are not stories of what has been," the custodian said. "They are stories of what might be. Stories unwritten, paths untraveled, lives that breathe only in possibility. This place holds the weight of choices." Alara's lips parted as she turned her gaze to the countless rows of books. Each spine shimmered faintly, some steady, some flickering. She felt dizzy at the thought that behind every cover lay a life, perhaps 100 lives, filled with joys and sorrows, waiting like seeds in the soil. "And you guard them?" she asked softly. The custodian nodded once. "That is my oath. These books cannot be opened freely, for to glimpse what has not yet come is to risk changing it. The balance of stories is fragile. A tale read too soon can unravel itself." Alara pressed her hand against her book. The truth sank into her like cold water. She had seen the shimmer of her possible futures, the outline of herself older, holding the lantern. She swallowed hard. "I wasn't supposed to see this, was I?" The custodian's voice, though soft, carried the weight of centuries. "No. Few ever find their way here. Fewer still are allowed to open the book that bears their name." He paused, his head tilting slightly, as though studying her with eyes she could not see. "And yet, the door opened for you. The archives chose you." A chill ran down her spine, mingling with the thrill of wonder. She glanced once more at the unfinished pages. "What happens now?" she asked. The custodian's silence stretched long, but when he finally answered, there was a note of sorrow in his tone. "Now, you must understand. The archives do not make mistakes. If you have been allowed within, if you have touched the book of your own story, it means you stand at the edge of a choice, one that will shape the rest of your life." Alara hugged the book close to her chest, her small frame trembling under the enormity of his words. She had always longed for stories beyond her own small town, for a life that felt like more than borrowed pages. And now, it seemed, the stories had reached back for her. The custodian lowered his lantern, its light dimming slightly, as if reflecting his solemn mood. What you saw in those pages was only a glimpse. Futures not fixed, paths not yet chosen. You are not bound to them. Not yet. Elara's heart thudded loudly in the quiet air. She could not tell if the feeling that grew inside her was fear or the first spark of something greater, something she had been searching for all along. The custodian's gaze lingered on her, and in the endless silence of the archives, she realized with certainty that nothing would ever be the same again. Elara stood beneath the towering shelves, her book pressed tightly to her chest, her mind spinning with the custodian's words. The library felt alive around her, its silence humming with anticipation, as though every volume leaned forward to listen. She could almost feel the weight of the choice pressing upon her shoulders, even though she had not yet been told exactly what it was. The custodian's lantern glowed softly, casting long shadows across the floor, its light falling like a path at his feet. His voice, when it came, was measured, solemn, yet not without gentleness. "You saw glimpses of yourself," he said. "Visions of what might come. Do you understand what they mean?" Elara shook her head slowly. Her small fingers trembled as they brushed the edge of her book. "I saw myself older. I saw myself holding your lantern. It didn't feel like a dream." The custodian inclined his head. It was not a dream. It was a possibility. He lifted the lantern higher, and the shelves seemed to ripple in its glow. "Long ago, I too was a child who stumbled upon this place. Like you, I found the door beneath the moon. And like you, I opened the book that bore my name." Elara's breath caught. She had not dared imagine that he had once been like her. She stared at him, trying to picture the tall, silent figure as a boy standing at the meadow's edge, eyes wide with wonder. You were chosen," she whispered. "I was given a choice," the custodian replied. His voice carried the echo of memory, as though speaking of something that lived as much in sorrow as in truth. "The archives revealed to me what it has revealed to you, that there are paths beyond the ordinary, paths that carry both burden and wonder. To take up the lantern is to leave behind the life you knew, to step into a duty that few could ever imagine. To guard the unwritten stories is to guard the balance of all things." He lowered the lantern, its glow softening. "I chose to stay." The words fell heavily into the stillness, and Elara felt their weight sink into her. She looked around at the endless shelves, at the faintly glowing books, each one a universe waiting to be born. Her heart raced with both awe and dread. To be the custodian meant to live among wonders beyond measure, but also to live in solitude, bound to silence, hidden from the world. Her voice was quiet, trembling at the edges. "And if I choose not to stay, The custodian's lantern flickered, casting fleeting shadows across his hooded face. Then you will return to your life. The book will close, unfinished, but waiting. You will live as you were meant to, never again to glimpse the shelves, but always carrying within you the memory of what lies here. The archives do not punish. It only asks. Elara's hands tightened on her book. She thought of her mother's soft lullabies, of her father's careful ledgers, of the market square and the cobbled streets of her town. She thought of her nights beneath the blanket, lamp flickering, reading by stolen light. All of those things would remain hers if she walked away. And yet, the shelves called to her. They pulsed faintly in the lantern's glow, as though they recognized her already, as though they whispered that she belonged here. Her chest ached. She was no longer just a child who loved stories. She was part of one, and it demanded an ending she must choose for herself. The custodian stood unmoving, the embodiment of patience. His lantern glowed steadily, waiting. The archives have shown you the truth, he said at last. Now, the choice is yours. Elara closed her eyes for a moment, pressing her forehead to the cover of her book. She felt the silence press closer, deep and endless, waiting for the word that would shape her path. When she opened her eyes again, she no longer felt small, but caught between two worlds, one of warmth and home, the other of mystery and eternal duty. And she knew, with a clarity that pierced her fear, that the story would only move forward when she spoke her answer. Elara stood in the heart of the archives, the silver-bound book pressed tightly against her chest, her small frame dwarfed by shelves that stretched into eternity. The custodian's lantern glowed softly, casting a halo of golden light that warmed the stone beneath their feet. But it did little to ease the storm in her mind. She had dreamed her whole life of stories that belonged to her, of adventures beyond the pages written by others. Now that dream pressed upon her with a weight she had never imagined. The silence of the library was heavy. Every glowing spine seemed to lean closer. Every whisper in the air seemed to hum with expectation. Elara's eyes roamed over the countless rows, shimmering with unwritten lives, and her heart thudded in her chest. For the first time, she felt the enormity of what the custodian carried. To guard all of this, an infinite tapestry of possible worlds, of futures unborn, was no small thing. It was more than a task. It was a burden. Her knees felt weak as she stepped toward the nearest shelf. She lifted her hand and let her fingers hover above the bindings. Each one glowed faintly at her presence, responding to her nearness as though aware of her touch. She pulled her hand back quickly, afraid of what might happen if she dared to open even a single one. Yet in her hesitation, her imagination soared. She thought of what it would mean to live among these stories, to wander through halls of endless wonder, to be the keeper of secrets too vast for anyone else to hold. But with the wonder came the shadow of loss. She thought of her parents, waiting at home in their little house, her mother sewing by the firelight, her father dozing after a long day's work. She thought of the warm smell of bread drifting through the market square, of her neighbors nodding kindly when she passed. If she chose to stay, she would never walk those cobbled streets again. She would never wake to the chatter of birds on her window, never feel the simple weight of her father's hand resting on her shoulder. Her throat tightened. "How did you choose?" she asked at last, her voice barely more than a whisper. The custodian regarded her silently for a long moment, then lifted the lantern so that its glow deepened across the shelves. His voice, when it came, was low, carrying both strength and sorrow. "I chose the library. I believed the stories were safer in my hands. But every choice carries its shadow. The warmth of home fades. The sound of laughter becomes memory. Still, I do not regret. For without guardians, these books would fall into chaos, and the world would lose its balance." His words pressed against her heart, heavy and solemn. Elara closed her eyes, pressing her forehead to her book. She imagined herself walking these aisles forever, lantern in hand, silent and watchful. She imagined herself growing older within these walls, her life given wholly to the stories of others. A part of her thrilled at the thought of such importance, of being chosen by the archives themselves. But another part ached, sharp and deep, at the thought of losing everything she loved. When she opened her eyes again, tears shimmered on her lashes. She looked up at the custodian, her voice trembling but clear. "I don't want to forget my family. I don't want to lose who I am. Stories are beautiful, but I still want to live mine." The custodian inclined his head slightly, the shadows of his hood hiding his expression. The lantern's glow flickered once, as though acknowledging her words. Elara felt the shelves grow quieter, the whispers dimming, as if the library itself had heard her answer and accepted it. The weight of choice still pressed upon her, but beneath it now was something steadier, a certainty that her story, unfinished as it was, still belonged to her. She was not yet ready to surrender it, not yet ready to trade her life for endless silence. And in that moment, standing beneath the towering shelves of the Moonlight Archives, Elara understood. Being a dreamer was not about holding all stories. It was about carrying her own, one page at a time. The golden glow of the custodian's lantern softened, settling into a gentler light as though it had heard Elara's choice and accepted it. Around them, the shelves of the Moonlight Archives stood silent and still, their whispers fading into a hush. For the first time since she had entered, the library felt less like a place waiting to test her, and more like a place listening, honoring what she had decided. Elara still held her book tightly, its silver letters warm beneath her fingertips. It no longer felt heavy with expectation, but familiar, like a part of her heart that had always been there. She traced her name with her thumb and breathed out slowly, steadying the flutter in her chest. The custodian stepped closer. His face was still hidden beneath the shadow of his hood, but his presence felt different, lighter, as though a long, unseen burden had shifted just slightly. He lifted his lantern, and for the first time, Elara thought she saw a faint curve at the edge of his lips. A smile, fragile and fleeting, yet real. "You have chosen," he said quietly. His voice was softer than before, carrying not just solemnity, but something gentler, almost tender. "The archives will remember." Elara lowered her gaze. "Will I remember?" she asked, her voice almost breaking. "When I leave, will I remember all of this? Or will it fade like a dream?" The custodian's silence lingered. At last, he raised his lantern higher, and its golden light spilled across the open aisle, revealing a narrow path winding between the shelves. It seemed to lead toward a faint shimmer at the farthest edge. His voice carried gently across the glow. "You will remember enough to know that your story is yours to write, enough to carry the wonder with you, though not the weight." Elara's eyes stung with unshed tears, but she nodded. She did not want to forget. Yet even if she could not carry every detail, the memory of this place, of its vastness and its silence, would remain etched in her heart. She hugged the book one last time, before slowly lifting it back toward the custodian. He took it from her hands with reverence, placing it back upon the shelf. The silver glow dimmed, as though settling back into sleep. Together, they walked the aisle in silence. The library did not feel endless anymore. It felt timeless, watching her with quiet approval. The custodian's lantern cast a pool of golden warmth before her, guiding her back toward the shimmer she had glimpsed ahead. Step by step, the glow brightened until it revealed the outline of the oak door, waiting where the meadow had once been. Elara paused at the threshold. She turned to face the custodian, her small hands gripping her shawl. "Will you always be here?" she asked softly. The custodian inclined his head. "Until another chooses differently." Her heart ached at the thought of him standing watch forever, alone among the shelves. Yet, in his lantern's light, she no longer saw sorrow alone. There was peace too, as though her choice had given him a gift he had long forgotten. The simple reminder that the path of a dreamer is never the same for all. Elara nodded, then stepped through the door. The meadow's cool air rushed around her, carrying the soft scent of grass and night flowers. Behind her, The oak door faded into mist, the glow dissolving as though it had never been. Only the silver moon remained above, casting its light across the quiet town. Elara stood still for a long time, her heart steady. She knew she would carry this night with her, even if no one else could see the door or believe the tale. She would return to her life, to her family, to the warmth of ordinary days. But now she carried something more, the certainty that her story was hers to shape, and that every dream was a beginning, waiting for its page. High above, the moon drifted in silence, its silver light watching kindly over her, and somewhere, deep beyond the reach of the meadow, the custodian's lantern glowed on, steady and patient, guarding the shelves of stories that waited for their dreamers.